Hi, and welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the new functions within RUCKUS Analytics called Data Studio. So charts, like I said earlier, is where everything is based upon. That is the equivalent of, in the past, going into Data Explorer and then ultimately, building your table and saying, hey, I want to know how many APs are running on low power, or how many APs, what's the overall, session count per AP, or things like that. What you would do as a simple query within Data Explorer, that you're now going to do in charts. So what we'll see here is, again, what we talked about earlier. So you had in Data Explorer data cubes, dimensions, and measures. Within our chart environment, you now have columns, metrics, and data sets, columns, and metrics would be the equivalent for those three. So, and then you'll see here, much like in Data Explorer, you have the notion of favorites as well. So if I were to click on a star, that's going to mark it as a favorite. When I was back on my home screen, I would see that chart show up in my favorites column. We'll see that here in a little bit. So let's jump into it. If I want to build a new chart, let's assuming I'm going into a customer environment and Dane hasn't beaten me to the punch here building a bunch of stuff. I would go ahead and click on a new chart, and you're going to see basically how you want to visualize that data. Now, I will warn you, start off small. Think about data in terms of probably tables, big numbers. Those are probably the two that are the easiest to get your hands around to really figure out how the whole system is working. Much like it says, table is very simple. It's a column on the left that's going to indicate, what would have been your dimension, and then your measure, which is now your metric in the quantitative fields. So the thing that it's going to need you to do is select a data set. So in this particular case, I'm just going to pick controller inventory. You'll see here in a minute why. And then I'm just going to pick a basic table. It's going to show us some searchable fields. So obviously, as you look down the side here, you can see all charts, recommended charts, and then charts by category. Before I click on continue to create, if you wanted to look at what some of these are, they get to be very, very esoteric and very strange in some cases. Whatever this is, a disbursement of data, heat maps, things like that. Some of these take pretty significant understanding of how the charts work in order to put data in the right formatting to make it make sense. Again, that's where I would go back to the gallery and I would look at what the engineers are building as a template or a base set, and then kind of reverse engineer from there for your own data that you're interested in. So there's a significant amount. I think in Data Explorer, there was only 13 visualization types. Here, I think there's over 100, so it can be pretty overwhelming. Stick to popular, stick to tables, you'll do just fine. So we need a data set, a table, and then we can create our new chart. Now here, you'll notice that this says for this particular type of visualization, you need to have a group by, a metric, and percentage metric that are essentially mandatory fields. And you'll see those by the red indications here on the left side. So what we're going to do here, again, we've already selected our data set that was predefined, but we don't really know anything more here at all about what we're supposed to do or what anything is. So it's kind of hidden, but this is a little lifesaver here. On the left side, you see this Open Data Source tab. This is the equivalent of expanding the data cube back in the Explorer days and knowing what dimensions are available to you in that data cube. So here, again, we're talking about Data Studio. So this is our data set, as indicated up here at the top. These are our columns down here, which are what would be considered the dimensions in Data Explorer. And these are our metrics, or what would have been the measures in Data Explorer. So in this particular case, if I wanted to see, let's take example, maybe controller, let's see here, what do we want to do? Controller name. So if I want to look at over time, right? So here's our time indications. We're just going to leave it on last day, and it's going to be a 1 hour granularity. The group by is going to be the dimension that we're going to be interested in. So in this particular case, we're going to go ahead and select, let's take, what do we want? AP, let's see, let's take controller model. Okay, and then underneath metric, what do we want to see? We want to see system counts. So let's do that. And let's go ahead and just run that as a very, very basic environment. So in this particular case, we see here's all the different types of controllers, how many we currently have within our system. So again, this is the RUCKUS network controller, the lab environment. So that may not have captured what I was actually interested in seeing. So if I say, well, wait, this maybe isn't the right data set. Controller inventory is it's not something that I think I really want. I can click on these 3 dots here and say, yeah, you know what, let me change that data set. That didn't have what I was looking for. So I want different dimensions that I can work with, or different metrics, different columns to work with. So in this case, I actually want to go down to maybe AP inventory, right? So it's going to warn me, hey, if you already built a chart, if that data, what you had selected in your group by, if that's not available in this data set that you're selecting, your chart's going to be broken and you're going to need to rebuild it. So we acknowledge that. Yep, that's great. Now we can see, okay, here's all of the columns that are available to me now in this new data set, which is AP inventory. And here's my metrics that I can measure upon. So in this particular case, I want to go ahead and say, okay, well, my group by, again, it's 35 options because we see that here. We see that here, 35 options. And in this particular case, I want to say, okay, let's do the controller name. So let's pick that. And then just very simply, let's just do, as a metric, I want AP count, right? So how many APs are in each controller? Very, very basic query, right? So let's run that. So here we know now by controller name, how many APs each of those controllers has. And you can see it's highlighted to show visual reference of the scale. In this case, 439 APs in zone 1. And then going down, as I scroll down, it goes down to just the 1 APs down here in the bottom. And that might be interesting. That might be enough data for whatever it is that I'm trying to work with. But in some cases, we want a little better formatting, or a little, maybe a little more granularity as far as what we're actually seeing here. So what we can do is we can actually look at percentage metrics. So if we want to add a percentage, like here it says, okay, it's 439, but 439 APs out of how many? I don't know. Is this 50% of all the APs? Is it more? Is it less? So I can actually add a percentage metric that says, okay, let's look at the AP count and say, what percentage is 439 of the entire system that's in my scope, right? So just by turning that on, okay, well, that's 18% of all the APs in my system are pinned to that particular controller. And so that's a very, very quick way to format some of the data. Now, as we go through it, let's look at some of these other options that we have available to us. So we did the percentage. We can sort. Sort is kind of interesting. It's kind of redundant because you can simply just click on the name or the column title, and it's going to sort by that column. But if you want it to be formatted that way all the time, you can actually put in your sort by metric here and say, I always want to sort. And it's by your metric. It's not by your group or your column. It's by your metric that it's going to sort by. So if I wanted to always sort by the AP count, then it's gonna run that. It's going to save it as this column is always going to be formatted with the highest number at the top. So we can take that out if we don't really want that. Okay, so the next one is server pagnation. So server pagnation is basically a way to help visualize the data when you come into a dashboard. If you're just looking at data here, it really isn't that big a deal. I just scroll down, I see all of my data. It's very, very standard. You know, you're just kind of viewing it in a continuous screen, not a big deal. But you'll see later when we go over into dashboards that you maybe only have a defined area within your window that you're going to display this particular data. So we want to refine that data to make it more meaningful within that defined window. So we can do server pagnation, and at this point, what's going to happen is it's going to say, okay, within your defined window structure, and in this particular case, I said limit it to 10 entries per page. So I see my 10 here, and then I see multiple pages depending on the volume of data that I'm trying to represent by this chart. So in this particular case, my scaling is shadowed or highlighted based on its ranking within this view of the entire system. So if I go to page 3, you'll now see here's 8, but the bar is significantly larger than if it were on this page. 8 would be simply just a small line here. So the representation of the data is correlated by the data that's actually being shown, and then it's grouped again by whatever I define here. If I say I want 20 per page, then obviously it's going to redo this graph and it's going to say, okay, here's your 20, and then next page and so on. And then the graphs the visualization changes per page. So that can be kind of useful. The other thing that you can do is show if you have data that's time sensitive, so maybe number of sessions, maybe it's throughput or overall, you can actually include a time indicator, and that'll add it here. It'll say for this particular granularity, right? We selected 1 hour granularity. So for each hour, it'll actually give you the statistics of what's happening. That's not always very helpful. So it may be for the data that you're going to be looking at, it may not. And then this one is kind of valuable. So this one is show totals. And basically what that does is it gives you a summary at the bottom that'll show the entire system. So number of sessions, overall throughput, things like that. Within your metrics, it will summate those items for you. Now, again, if we go back to limiting our environment, it's going to show us the total, not necessarily what's visible on that particular screen. And we'll see some of that, how we can change some of that here in a little bit. Okay, so those are basically some of the basic formatting tools. At this point, let's say this is the data that we wanted. At this point, we can go ahead and save it. And when I save it, it's going to ask me to give me a name. So we're just going to do AP to controller. So I'm going to save that. And what you're going to see is it's going to bring me back to, it's going to save it. And then if I go back to my charts indicator, I'm going to see AP controller here, updated a few minutes ago. Looks like Clifton's heavily working on his own. Good job, Clifton. So if we click on this now, you can see here it was just a few minutes ago. I click on it and say, yep, that's the one that I was working on. And here's our chart back already saved for us, right? So we don't have to go and we don't have to build a dashboard. We don't have to do anything else. It's already visible to us. Okay, so now basically what we're going to look at is, maybe we want to add some more visualization or more filters. Maybe I don't really care per se about all of these systems. I only want to know a subset of them. So we can go into this notion of filters, right? So filters are a way basically, again, like it says, of limiting the data set or only including data from a particular data set. The thing that's cool here, and this is a little bit different than how Data Explorer used to work, my filter doesn't have to be a visible metric or a visible group within the environment, column within the environment. So let's take an example. I still have all 36 columns. So if I pop this back out again, we see we have 35 actual columns. So I can actually go in here and say, okay, well, I want to filter on maybe it's model, right? So let's look at controller models and say, I only want to know controller model. And I say, I only want to know controllers that are virtual, not physical hardware environments. So I can say the model does not equal, or let's do equals in this particular case, virtual smart zone, right? Virtual smart zone in this particular case, it would be high scale with a C, right? So now I'm going to run that query, and it's going to say, okay, well, here's all of the controllers that are virtual smart zone high scale in my environment. So if I scroll down, here's virtual, this is 66, this is my environment. I know it's a high scale. So, and I know I've got 7 APs connected to it. And so that's interesting. And my APs make up 1% of the entire environment. But let's say I wanted ones that were not virtual high scale. So I wanted to exclude. I can go back in here and say, instead of equals, I say it does not equal that. So it's everything other than that. I run this again, and I say, okay, there's all of our controllers that are not. So these would include physical as well as virtual that were not high scale. And in this particular case, I can scroll down and I would say, let's see here, controller name. Why didn't it sort it by? So these would be all of the controllers. There's Clements Lab. That's what I was looking for. It wasn't, oh, because I have a, do I have a filter on there? No. But anyway, Clements Lab, that's an internal system that I have that is an Essentials, Virtual Smart Zone Essentials, and I do only have one AP connected to it. So this filter is working for me the way that I would expect it. So again, I could save this as a chart. It's going to give me the option to override what I already did or save it as a new chart. This is the name that it picked because that's what it was already saved as previously. So yep, I want to go ahead and overwrite the existing one. And then when I go back to my charts, you're going to see that it's now AP controller. It was just updated a few seconds ago. So all is in line there. But let's go ahead and look at, if I wanted to format, so maybe I wanted to visualize this data a little bit differently. So if I wanted to say like, anything with, more than 10 APs, I want to do something different. So I can go into this customize tab and say, okay, well, I want to do a few things with this data. For one, I want to add a search box so I could actually do a search. When I was looking through trying to find Clements Lab, it was taking me a minute because it wasn't sorting right or whatever. It would have been a lot quicker just to physically type in Clements Lab and see it. So I can put a search box, and then you'll see here up at the top right, I've now added a search box. And then cell bars, so that's what these are considered, cell bars. So if they're currently on, if I turn them off, you'll see they go away. The colorization, so it's kind of weird, but basically it's trying to represent positive numbers, negative numbers. A lot of our data doesn't really use that a whole lot, but again, you can pick or choose whether you want that. The align is kind of interesting. So all of the data typically is formatted either hard right or hard left. Columns are typically on the left formatting, and then metrics are typically on right formatting. But if you didn't want that, you can change those here and say, okay, I want align data, but I can also change it here and say, well, I want that to be centered, or I want that to be right justified or whatever. And you can do those by column. Now, this is where why I wanted to show you the customize more is for the conditional formatting. So again, we talked about anything more than say 10 APs, I want to highlight. So I can actually go into conditional and say, if the AP count is greater than target value is 10, I want to make it green, right? So then it's going to highlight it, and the closer it gets to my target, the more it's going to shade away from the primary color, which was hard green. So just that quick, I can say, okay, well, now I've got a visualization, and then I can save this graph, top 10 or, whatever I want to call it. And then it's highlighted for that particular metric to stand out. And then if I go ahead and save it, then that'll be available within the report section. So we'll go ahead and save that again. Okay, so that is the basic formatting, the basic functionality of a chart. So the chart, again, represents the data set in a visually digestible way for you to understand what you're looking for. Again, tables are very, very easy to start with, so I would recommend that for you guys to just kind of get your feet wet with this. As you get into some of the other visualizations, they get to be, much more esoteric in some case. If you did want to change this visualization, you can see it right here. I'm currently selected on table. So if I click on that and I say I want to, change the style, it will try to keep your data selections and settings the same. But if that new visualization does not fit with the data that you've selected, you do have to rebuild it. We're not going to do that in the sake of time, but just know that you can go back and change visualizations if you wish at some point.